Good and gracious God, we are gathered here today because we have been blessed to be in the presence, to know, to have been taught by this gentle giant, Mary Barker. A woman who was fearless in the way that she lived her life, blazing paths for women in education locally, for living in such a way to teach all of us to be ourselves and live uniquely. As testimony to all of these hats in this room, it is evident that her life was well lived and lessons well taught. God, as we, as a singular group of people, will doubtfully ever be in the same room again, let us not waste these lessons that Mary taught us. But let that voice linger with us the rest of our lives, reminding us to have dignity, to show grace, to slow down, to enjoy the notes, the melody, the rhythms of life. God, there is an irony here that a woman who spent her life teaching us the importance of words, there are not words in our language capable of doing full justice to the life of Mary. But the words "thank you" for this woman do hold some weight. And so we say, for the life of Mary, thank you. It is in your name we pray. Amen.
Many of us have lived very charmed lives. We have been blessed financially. We have been blessed with great friends. We have been blessed with groups like have come together this morning. To those who say that people no longer go to funerals, I say, look around you. Look at the friends, look at the acquaintances, look at the former students who have known and loved Mary Emma Traylor Barker. I have known 5 generations of her family. I've been to Woodsville, Ohio, where she grew up. I've lived in the house with her and with Jack. The Lord gave me wonderful, wonderful parents, and yet He saw that there were still a few rough edges that needed attending to. And Jack and Mary have tried to deal with some of them. I have seen her when she cooked for me, including teaching me the value of things like broccoli and Brussels sprouts. I have seen her in her quiet moments of thought, and I think I know the family as well as anyone here today. We are here, as Paul told the Romans, to weep with those who weep. And yet I must say that any weeping that is done today is for us and not for her. This is indeed a celebration of a life well lived, a life that was purposeful, and a life that impacted many of us who are here today. Later in that same book of Romans, the Lord says, "Greet Mary, who created much labor for us." And there are those of us who are here today for whom she created labor in English classes and in other classes. Mary Barker was a person who loved good music. She loved good literature. She loved good conversation. She appreciated good art. She had good friends. She was certainly a person who appreciated what was true, what was honorable, what was just and lovely and gracious and excellent and worthy of praise. She focused on those things in life that were at the best. I had the opportunity this week, over the last few days, to go through her very, very complete library. Now, you would probably expect to find things there from Keats. Those of you who knew her as a Sunday school teacher, maybe from Bonhoeffer. There were writings of Wendell Berry and Coleman Barks and many others to whom we had all been exposed. But there were also books, Quantum Physics for Non-Physicists, a book on the life of Paul, a book that had been opened and certain things noted in the margins on Einstein's theory of relativity. Indeed, this was a lady with a terrific and active mind who was interested in so many things that the world had to offer. There are many things I could say in a short 10 minutes about Mary Barker, who meant so much to me in my life. But what most of us would start with was the notion that she was a teacher. She literally taught thousands over a 50-plus year career. How many of you had Mary Barker in class? Yeah, I thought that would be the case this morning. She taught us as one speaking with authority. Many of you who have known her for many years know that her life started with the goal of becoming a singer, particularly an opera performer. An accident intervened, and rather than spending a great part of her life worrying about the ending of that particular goal, she merely turned to teach, and all of us in Chattanooga are better off because of it. She was not a normal teacher. I had her my first period, my first day at Chattanooga High School. I immediately realized that I was in another level of academics beyond anything that I had been in before. She was not a normal teacher. I never saw her have to raise her voice because the class was out of order. I never saw anyone argue with her about a grade. I've never had a fellow student say, "Boy, she was not very prepared and we didn't have a good class today." If you looked for the embodiment of someone who would teach all of us, Mary Barker fit that role. She was also one who greatly enhanced the social, cultural, and religious life of this area. She loved Chattanooga. She loved the mountains, she loved the river, she loved the plain, she loved the ridge where she lived, and it loved her back. Those of you who are here today know that she loved this church, and this church loved her back. She loved the Chattanooga Symphony, the Chattanooga Opera Association, the Houston Museum. And there's almost no educational institution from Chattanooga High to UTC here that she has not impacted in a very, very significant way. She even came to like football. And that was a stretch for her. But she decided that sitting at the 50-yard line at the University of Georgia was not a bad way to watch a game that she never fully understood. But she knew who she was. And she knew what she believed. And she believed, just as we all do here this morning, that God so loved the world that He sent His only begotten Son. And that there was a hope and a promise and a future after that that cannot be really more fully fulfilling or more focused. Mary was a very self-disciplined person. She was a very measured person. She was self-disciplined about what she ate, about what she wore, about what she said, about where she went. She may have done it, but I never heard her use a 4-letter word. She believed in letting her yea be yea and her nay nay. And she had, at least, I got through counting 2 days ago, 47 hat boxes. Some of whom had 2 or 3 hats, some of which had 2 or 3 hats in them. And she was always a person who set a sense of style that many of the rest of us aspired to. Mary Barker also had a worldview. I never heard her say a negative word about a particular group, a sect, a particular religious identity, or any ethnic group. She may have thought it, but she didn't say it, at least in my presence. And I wonder, among all of us, how many of us about which that should be said. So I would simply say this morning, for one who taught us all so much, who lived with a sense of class and dignity that is so often missing in today's world, that I'm not surprised at how many have come to honor her. This is, in my opinion, a day of celebration. Perhaps other than Jack, there's no one here who knew her better than I did. She was ready to move to the other side. She was prepared through a life of devotion and Christian commitment to a cause. And there's so many who have come today who deserve accolades and understanding that she would offer if she were here speaking. To Jack, who cared for her in a way that few of you can imagine, particularly over the last several difficult months. For a love that extended almost 70 years and a care that cannot be compared, all of us owe him a great debt of gratitude for his concern for Mary. For Barbara, a loving sister who cared deeply about her and came to say goodbye just a couple weeks ago, who shares Mary's love for the church, for education, for thought, a person that depended on Mary in many ways and vice versa. We're grateful for Barbara and for her life and her presence here today. For nieces and nephews, Lisa and Sarah and Brett, and for the impact for good that they had on her life in so many ways. And for my own Mary, who loved and cared for her in so many ways. For our family, for David, for Taylor, for Carrie, for Mary Page, who were willing to share time away for us so that we could be with her and as children and adopted grandchildren, simply loved her and cared for her as we do. So we come today to honor a life well lived, a life lived by a person who has had such a positive impact on so many of us who are here today. A person who has had a positive impact on so many of us in this community. And an impact that will live for many, many years beyond her time on this earth. Because she has now gone to a place that's better for her, better for all of us. And she has enhanced Heaven's choir in the last few days, just as the choir here and the singing here on Sunday morning won't be as good as it has been with her presence. I did something 2 days ago that I probably shouldn't have done, but I went into her office and I rummaged around for a while. I saw the inadequacy of the bookcases, the inadequacy of the cases that held the great symphonies of the world and the music that was so much a part of her life. I rummaged around in the desk and looked at some of the things that were there. And yet on top of the desk, and I don't know how long it had been since she had been there, I found this card where she had written out, "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing." It is that hope and that belief system that propelled Mary Barker in everything that she did. Our life and our personal family, and this family, this church, this area, this community, all of us are better off because of her presence, her example, and her teaching of all of us. May she rest in peace, and may we always be grateful for the impact she had on all of us.
Like many of you, I've already cried. So now I want a little while to laugh, and we're going to laugh a little bit. Mary Traylor Barker claimed many of you as prized students. You've heard from one already articulate in wonderful terms the impact she had on his life. Neither Jean nor I was a student of Mary in the formal schooling sense. Yet, in many respects, we were each her unruly, sometimes obstinate and difficult adult pupils. We met Mary and Jack 50 years ago this year at Central Church of Christ, having moved from another place to there, where we were embraced by them and a host of others who made us feel immediately at home. Jean's immediate memory of Mary was each Sunday after the sermon, as we gathered on the steps of the congregation, the question would be asked by Mary or Jack or Jean or me, "Where are we going to lunch?" There were lots of choices. Town and Country, Mount Vernon, Goulas, Fens, and that was pretty much it in Chattanooga back in 1968 and 70. You need to also know that not only could Mary choose a place to eat in Chattanooga after services, but when we were afforded the wonderful opportunity to accompany Jack and Mary on a Thanksgiving weekend to New Orleans, she picked the restaurants there. And I imbibed my first glass of red wine at Moran's in New Orleans with Mary. Jean was introduced to the evils and the joys of the Singapore sling. for those of you untutored in alcoholic beverages, that can get you going. The fifth row end seats are where Mary, Jack, and I sat every Sunday for the past 30 years or so. Some months ago, Mary asked me about the scripture to which Michael alluded and which Jonathan just read. She said, "Where's that verse about fighting the good fight and finishing the course?" And I stumbled through the Bible I had pretty well marked up and said, "Here, it's Paul speaking to Timothy, 2 Timothy 4, 6 through 8, and we read it together." And she said, "Want that read at my funeral?" And I thought, well, to myself, but didn't say to her, "Why do you want that read at your funeral, Mary? There's so many more things that could be read about love and all the things that you've represented in your family and things that could be said that would really, truly be an exhortation. Why would you want that?" And then she didn't have to answer that because I knew. Mary was not one who contended in the sense that we know contending. She had no adversary per se. She believed that ignorance was her enemy, and she did everything in her power to dispel it, even against those of us who resisted that effort at times. She wanted that read, I think, because, Michael, it was the teacher reminiscing about his own life to his pupil. Mary wanted a bit of a reflection. And if you read the obituary, and those of you, of course, who knew her well, you knew what she achieved as a female educator at a time when that wasn't always the case for female educators. She distinguished herself and led and was in charge, wasn't she, Barbara? She could make a decision and have people follow it. And she came out of retirement from one community college because Jim Catanzaro wouldn't let her rest and insisted that she come to another and assume another vice presidency. She taught. I had a letter from her once. She could send you a letter and in it compliment you and admonish you at the same time. Did you have that experience? She could make you feel wonderful and then let you know, Alan, you really don't know everything. You only think you do. And that letter had in it some instruction that we find in immortal words in English literature, of which, of course, Mary was an absolute master. And the words of Polonius to his son Laertes in the Shakespearean play Hamlet. As Laertes is about to embark on a journey, Polonius gives some extraordinarily sound advice in a very few words, and Mary appreciated the economy of words, well used. And then at the close of his advice, he says, "This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man." Now we read those words and think, what an immortal, fabulous expression and command of the English language. But imagine with me for a moment what I've imagined the last few days. Mary sitting 5 centuries or so with William Shakespeare, red pencil in hand, glasses positioned thus so, and hat or fascinator appropriately on her head, and saying, "Now, Billy, that's pretty good work. But there are some things I think you need to pay attention to. Number one, you don't say your own self. We're beyond that. And what's this business about canst not? Why couldn't you just say cannot? And this notion about not being false to any man, don't you know there's more than 50% of the world who aren't male? You need to think about us too. You need to be more inclusive in your language. She would have redlined that, complimented him on writing a piece that for centuries would be read and recited and appreciated, but she would have pointed out to him those things that from a syntax standpoint and perhaps an apt grammatical standpoint could have been better done. And then she would have smiled and put her pencil away and congratulated him on a good job. She was true to herself, but not to herself in a selfish sense. There was no conceit about her. She was true to herself as a member of community, of a position with colleagues in academia, with the voices of choirs, with the symphony notes she wrote for the Chattanooga Symphony. She was true to herself as a member of community. She fought a fight not against others, but with others, against those things that make us less than we can be, and encouraged us to be all we can. And she ran her course faithfully and diligently and kept that faith which was hers and hers alone inside her, but that we all share in a broader sense. So heaven be forewarned. Mary's on the way, red pencil in hand. Archangels and angels alike, while you sing the chorus, beware. She's going to correct your errors. God love you, Mary. Thank you for what you've done for all of us.
There is a poetry to the life of a teacher. Perhaps it is because of the rhythm of the academic year that gives one's vocation and one's life a sense of meter. Perhaps it is because whether one teaches the sciences or the arts or the humanities, whether their students are dissecting tissue or tying their shoes for the first time, there's a beauty in discovery and rediscovery, in knowing something you didn't know before, or hearing something you've heard many times in a different way. The book that we know as Ecclesiastes was originally titled in Hebrew Qohelet, which is often understood to mean the teacher. The author of Qohelet was likely one whose great work in life was to gather people together and to challenge them through tough questions, through parable and example, to seek wisdom in life, though life itself may be a mystery. Though we translate one of the lines in Qohelet to be, everything is vanity, it may be better translated as, all is breath, all is vapor. Life is ephemeral and life is full of mystery. There's a poetry to this life made of our very breath, the teacher writes. You can't grab it or pin it down. But in that mystery of life, there's time for everything. It's a poetry that you have to live beyond the words. The poetry that teaches us, that points us toward wisdom, that points us to both the beauty and complexity of life. It's that sort of poetry that makes for the life of a teacher. Like the author of Qohelet, Mary was the sort of teacher who taught with her whole life. The sort of teacher who knew that there was a time for everything. A time for joie de vivre. A time to study for your spelling exam. And there was always time for beauty, whether that came in the form of Vivaldi or in a hat perfectly crafted and perfectly worn for the perfect occasion. Carol Sharp a member here at First Christian, first knew Mary, as many of you did, as Mrs. Barker, her sophomore English teacher. Carol wrote to me that most of my teachers wore plain shirtwaist dresses and lace-up brown leather shoes, closely resembling Aunt Bee from the fictional town of Mayberry, best known from the 1950s Andy Griffith Show. But when Mrs. Barker walked into the classroom, we beheld a young, lovely brunette, dressed in crisp white blouses, pearls, a slim black skirt, and high-heeled shoes. Her very presence caught the immediate respect and attention of each student in the room. Students were greeted with, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen." In her classroom, you weren't treated like a child, but addressed as Miss or Mr., followed by your last name. Soon her classroom was known as hallowed ground by every student who entered the door. And what happened there in that classroom was important, and you behaved as such. Later that year, Carol shared with me, Mrs. Barker shared that while studying at the Boston Conservatory of Music, she suffered a tragic automobile accident, which injured her trachea and her vocal cords. And she had been told that she might never be able to sing again. It was a devastating blow to anyone who had a dream that they were that close to achieving. Mary required months of rehabilitation after that accident. One afternoon during that academic year, before the end of the second semester, students were notified that they were being treated to a very special teacher's talent show during their afternoon assembly period. Students, Carol wrote, were thrilled because several of the teachers proved to be very entertaining outside the classroom for once. Halfway through the talent show, to the audience's astonishment, Mary Barker walked onto the stage, accompanied by a pianist, and she began to sing a beautiful aria. Those of us who knew her story were mesmerized, tears of joy running down our cheeks as she sang. And Carol notes that she thinks it was the first time Mary had sung in public since her traumatic automobile accident. They had so much respect for the determination, resilience, and willpower of their beloved teacher. She was a true inspiration to her students and faculty members. And then that following day, her students complimented her on that incredible performance, and in return, always the teacher, she told them, "You should always be strong. Life often throws you a curve, and you should direct yourself toward new goals and avenues." Mary taught them, like the author of Coelet, there's a time for everything. There may come a time where you learn that life is indeed vapor, ephemeral, and unpredictable. So learn to be strong. But when there is a time for everything under heaven, her lesson would go on, there is more possibility than you might imagine. And there may even be a time for arias you can't even imagine yourself singing in the future. Above all, there's a time to live. And what a life it was for all of us, this time that we have shared when Mary Barker has touched our lives by teaching us with hers, teaching us with a life that was indeed sheer poetry. A life that now I, in this time of grieving, give thanks to God for.